Hey MicroGrinders, Elton from MicroGrinder.com, back again with another video for our How to Beat MicroStakes 10 series. This should hopefully be the third episode in our series. Our first two episodes were of our mentor reg for tabling 10 on the 888 Poker Network, specifically two tables of Snap Poker being their speed version of poker, and two tables of regular 6 max. And so now that we have a couple tables of him playing, I figured I'd do a video of myself for tabling 10 So since our previous series of how to beat Bovada 5 I've moved up to 10 my goal is to try to get to 25 within a couple months. Granted, I don't play a large volume of poker. I'm hoping I can do so fairly quickly. Since I've moved up, and before I started this series, I've logged around 3,500 hands, and I'm up around 6 buy-ins, beating the game at, I believe, around 17 buy-ins per 100. So I'm running fairly decent. Looking at my graph, I'm actually not above all-in EV. I'm running about break even with it, so I haven't been running great, I haven't been running bad. Certain portions I was below all-in EV, other portions I was above, and at the end, and at 3,500 hands, I'm right now just at break even. When this guy leads out here for 4 times, I'm just going to flat. 6s are around the cutoff for where I want to set mine. I think 5s, 4s, spades, and deuces, it's either a 3-bet or a fold, but I think 6s and up, I think we can profitably call, because if the flop comes down 5 or lower, we have an overpair, and we can float him for at least one street. So I'm going to go ahead and call. And then on this flop, unfortunately, there's not much we can do. On a 9-7 queen, two-tone flop, really our only move here is to check fold unless we want to bluff, but it's just too wet for anything, and it hits a lot of his range, even though he does have a wide range on the button for his stealing range. And then here, of course, this is a fold here. Ace-9 off, we're not going to defend. We'll just go ahead and fold, and then we'll fold our 6s. Ace-3 suited on table 1 on the top left-hand corner. If nobody brought in, I was going to open up on the button, and being in position to the 2 limpers and the small ISO raise, I'm going to flat being on the button, because I'm going to have relative position to all of them and absolute position to everybody on the table. And I'm not too worried about getting squeezed on 10 and if it happens, we'll just we'll make that decision as it comes to us. But I'm assuming that the blinds aren't going to squeeze. Player 5 here, he could potentially just shove since he's short stacked, but I don't expect either of these players to raise it up the majority of the time. And this is a really good flop for us. We can discount 5s from any of their ranges. There's only 2 more 5s in the deck. Granted, they did limp. Player 1 and player 2 did limp, so we can't fully discount it from their ranges, but a majority of the time we can. And then, of course, on this flop, we could check raise, but I don't want him to come over the top and then force me to make an all-in decision on the flop, especially with 2 players behind. So for that reason, I'm just going to flat. Being out of position and being the last stack, let's say if I was in player 2 position, I think it'd be a good spot for a check raise. But being here on the button, I think calling's fine, and it also gets player 1 to come along as well. And so now we have the nut flush. At this point, based upon the action that happens, we can either just call or we can go with a raise. And then with these 2 players in here, having the nut flush, I am going to raise, but I'm going to raise small. And the reason I am raising is because the board is paired, and if the board double pairs, it's going to put us in an interesting spot. It's going to put us in a trouble spot, so I'd rather try to get the money here on the turn. And with the nut flush draw here, we're just going to bet out in a limp pot. going back to this previous hand, I could have just called in position, but seeing how player 1 limped and king along, and then he donked out when the diamond hit, I felt he might call a small 3-bet, and then when player 3 called his raise as well, I thought he might call in addition. Here, with the limp under the gun, I'm going to ISO raise. I'm going to make it 50 cents instead of 40 because I want to discourage any other players from coming along. I just want to play this bad player heads up, and unfortunately, it doesn't work. It would be fairly funny if it just ended up being a family pot. And when player 4 jams here, I don't think he has to have that strong of a hand. If player 6 folds, I'm probably just going to jam over the top because player 2 and player 3 really capped their range here. I don't think they can call a rejam. I would assume that they would 3-bet with jacks plus, especially against, my isolation raise. So given that it's only going to cost me another 25 big blinds, I'm just going to rejam over the top. If he was any deeper, I would just go ahead and fold. But given tens, I think, against ace king, ace queen, ace jack, we're about a coin flip. We're actually ahead. We have 55% equity versus 45% equity. And the only thing we're worried about is a queen or a jack. And so we got him to shove live, and our rejam worked just fine there. And I wasn't worried about rejamming here, just reiterating, I'm not worried about player 2 or player 3 because they both cap their ranges here when they just flat my raise under the gun. Player 2 caps his range. I think he probably has a stronger range than player 3. Player 3 can have a really loose range because if you just really think about it, he's getting good odds to call, and he is in position to 2 players that have raises in front of him out of position. Up here on table 1 with pocket 4s, this is below my isolation range. I am not going to pop it up with 4s because if you think about this hand and you think about what you try to accomplish with it, especially out of position to 2 players, is that you're looking to flop a set. You're only going to flop a set 1 in 7.5 times. So with such a small pair, it just really doesn't make sense to raise it up. I would say that pocket 7s or pocket 8s for the most part would be about the bottom of my range for popping it up here with 3 people limping in the pot. But anything smaller, any other pocket pairs, we're just looking to flop a set, and then when we don't flop a set, we're just be folding. And here on table 1, if anybody does decide to bet out, we're just folding. Even if I did spike his head on the turn, I would still be worried just because his board's still connected. Somebody could be still playing 9-10, but I highly doubt it in a limp pot. I rarely think that we're winning here. Seeing how it checked around, potentially nobody has a queen, but I think somebody might have a weak jack. And then we're just going to go ahead and fold, given the odds that we're given. And then here, of course, with 10 jack off, I think this is near the bottom of my opening range in the cutoff, but seeing how we're playing 5 ways, and there's only 4 players left in the hand, I'm just going to go ahead and open it up. And then given this flop, on an ace-high flop, that's a semi-dry flop, we're always going to be c-betting. And I think this is a good c-bet because we're not just purely throwing a bluff out there. We have a backdoor flush draw for the, a backdoor straight draw for the nut straight with if a queen and a king hit, and we also have a gutter for the other nut straight with the 8. And so I think that if we do around just over half pot, we can also rep the ace and take it down if he doesn't have an ace. And then when he calls, when the 7 hits, if we think about his range, we're probably never going to get him to fold an ace. If he has a 7, he just tripped up. So given that we still have draws to the nut straight here, I could fire a second barrel, but I don't think it's going to accomplish much with any fold equity. I think it's just going to build up the pot. So with that said, I'm actually just going to check it back and hope for an 8. And then on this river, we're giving up. And if you think about his calling range on the flop, he's either got a 7 or 9 or an ace. We don't beat aces up for 2 pairs, and we don't beat any boats, so we just go ahead and fold. Jack 8 suited, definitely not defending out of position versus a short stack. If it was Jack 9, Jack 10, we might defend against a full stack, but against a short stack there's just really no money to be made. So I kind of just decided mid-video that I'm going to mix this up. So rather than make this 30 minutes of live play, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do 15 minutes of live play. We're creeping up on 11 minutes now. And then I'm going to do another 15 minutes of some detailed hand analysis. I think that's beneficial for players just to see a different perspective of how a hand was played and in-depth analysis of the hand as well. So we'll play, probably another orbit or two, and then I'll sit out and then pause the video and I'll open up some really interesting hand histories to give you an idea of really looking at ranges, perceived ranges, people's calling ranges, our betting ranges, bluff ranges, and so forth, and looking at our equity as well, and potentially doing some EV calculations in terms of some interesting decisions if we should call an all-in or we should fold based upon a player's jamming range. And I usually tag players, but since I'm only playing for another few minutes, I'm not going to take the time and tag them. But what I usually do based upon my HUD stats is I take a look at the HUD stats and I look to identify fish. If I don't have any HUD stats, the first identifier is a short stack. Anybody that has less than 100 big blinds and it's not fully stacked, you can just look at them as a fish. So for example, this player here, $7, we'd just automatically tag him as a fish. This player here with $5.74, the same thing. And then just so forth around the tables. Obviously here, this player with 60 cents with 6 big blinds, clearly he's a fish. Up on table 3, we're going to do a standard button steal against a 29-14 and a 45-25. We don't need to have a strong range here. We just can rep a perceived range, and if we get a good flop, we can go ahead and fire out a C-bet. Secondly, another way that we can identify fish is just look at their HUD stats. If you see a big gap between their VPIP and their pre-flop raise, you can really look at them as a fish. So for example, this player down here, his VPIP is 43, so he's playing 43% of the pots, he's only raising 7%. That's just a hallmark feature of a loose passive fish, and these are the type of players you want to target. This player 2 here, he's short stacked. He hasn't folded to any continuation bets here. We have a king high. That's about it. There's 53 cents in the pot. I think I could fire out around a half pot bet as a bluff here. I'm going to try this just for the flop, and if he calls, we're probably going to give up on a bad turn. Here with A7 off, same thing. I'm going to be stealing against these players. And then when he calls here on this flop and he checks back really quick, he has complete air with an ace high and he has this beat. The king high does have some showdown value now. He might have floated us with a smaller pocket pair and just got counterfeited, but at this point I'm just going to be checking it back and trying to get to showdown. And if he bets here on the river, then he obviously has it, but I think that we're good here a majority of the time because we have decent showdown with the king. We're only worried about an ace. I'm just going to check and hope he doesn't have an ace, but he does have an ace. Interesting enough, he has ace-jack offsuit, and he really didn't. What's interesting with that is that he didn't raise it. So we're going to raise our 10s here, and we're going to go ahead and do standard open with the queen 10 off. Against a 26-0, you know, we're always isolating. And if he wants to go ahead and try to get it in on the pre-flop, we're fine with that too with pocket 10s. Alright, so let me go ahead and sit out on these tables. I'm not too worried about just seeing the entire orbit. If I was playing higher stakes, I'd probably want to see until I got to the big blind. But seeing how it's 5 and 10 cent blinds, I'm really not too worried about that. It's really not much money lost or won, to be honest. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the video and then I'll be back in a second with some hand histories. Alright, grinders, back again with our hand histories. So we're going to head and start it off with pocket aces. So I have pocket aces and I am in the big blind. We have player 2 here, raises it up to 3.5 big blinds. From middle position, he's a 41-35, so I mean, bit of a loose player type of stats, a bit of laggy stats. And then we have this maniac here. So this guy labeled as a donkey, he's a 58-55. He's been playing crazy. This is over a sample of 40 hands, so it's not a small sample. His aggression factor is 5.3, so he's insanely aggressive, loves to bet. And he's been getting lucky. 33% of his hands go to showdown, and he's won 50%. Luckily for him, he's stealing 92% of the time, and he's only folding to steals half of the time. And what's really interesting here is that he's 3-betting 43% of the time, so he's 3-betting an absurd number. So when he 3-bets this player here, I don't give him much credit at all, to be honest. On a different table, he 3-bet me with an ace-5 off, so he's just really, really a bad player. But here's the interesting part with this. Granted, he's very aggressive and he's a bad player. He also doesn't like to fold. So, in addition to that, in addition to him not liking to fold, when somebody shows any sense of passivity, he gets super aggressive and he tries to steal the pot. So with that said, when it comes back to me with the aces, I'm definitely looking to raise it, and I'm definitely looking to raise it big. I'm not planning on putting in a standard 4-bet sizing of, you know, maybe 2.5x or just over 2x. I'm looking to bump it up and get max value against such a bad aggressive player. So it does fold around to me, and I believe I bump it up big, so I make it 340. I make it, you know, just over 3 times his raise, expecting him to call with any decent holding. You know, I would expect him to call with as light as like a king 10 off, or even maybe a 7-8 suited. This guy has just been crazy since he's been at the table. I've been waiting to get into a pot with him. So I make the raise, and the initial raiser folds, and as expected, he flats. And we flop, you know, the essential nuts here. We're not really afraid of a flush draw. It's just a small part of his range. So, granted that I did 4-bet him and he did call, what I plan to do here is to entice a bluff from him because he's so bluffy. He loves to bluff. Flopping top set, I see no reason to lead out. If I do lead out, if he doesn't have an ace, and because I have 2 aces, an ace on the board, there's only 1 ace left in the deck, so it drastically reduces the possibility of him having ace. He's going to fold anyways, but if I check, he may think that I was 4-betting him light with, you know, maybe anywhere from 9s through queens, and maybe potentially kings. I'm checking kings, and if he bets on the flop, I'm going to get upset and fold because I think he has an ace. So I check, and he puts out a big bet. The pot's now $10, and when he puts a 350 in, I only have 4 something left, so I have two options here. I could just smooth call and check the turn and hope that he puts me all in, but just because the fact that he bets 350 into this pot, so he bets around, you know, a half size bet or a half pot size bet, and when the pot is $10, if I call, it's going to be 13. I'm going to have $4 left. I'm obviously pot committed anyways, so I just decide to jam. And I think the jam is fine here. I could be jamming with a flush draw, I could be jamming with kings. If he has a weak ace, yes, I know there's not that many combos, but he could have any weak ace that's an offsuit ace, because I've seen him 3-bet weak aces before. I think he would call with as weak as, you know, an ace deuce or an ace 3. Granted, ace 3 does give him 2 pairs, but I think he'd even call with an ace deuce. And unfortunately, he folds. But by checking the flop rather than leading out, we received additional value that we probably wouldn't have if we let out. And if I did lead out, I'd probably lead out for around $5. So we got an additional 35 big blinds out of him. Alright, so same table, further along in the session. Unfortunately, this bad player here, he's gone, he's left the table. But there's still enough fishy players in here that's going to make it super profitable. We have a 27-16. He seems like he might be okay. We have a 44-2, so he's a super fish. We have 120, so he looks like he's really fishy. And we have a 26, so he looks fishy as well. And then this player here in 18-14 looks like a complete nit, kind of like me, a 20-13. So we're playing 5 ways. This player here is new to the table, or actually looks like he's sat out and he hasn't sat back in. So we're playing 5 ways. Under the gun limps, and then middle position, well, I guess effectively cut off. He puts a small isolation raise in. The fact that it's a small isolation raise, I am on the button with a speculative hand that does play well multi-ways, seeing how we're both deep stacked, about roughly 150 big blinds each. I think this is a great hand to call in position with. If I wasn't deep stacked and if he wasn't deep stacked, I may just opt for fold, but seeing how we are deep stacked and this flops a lot of the nuts, I think it's an easy call. So I make the call, folds around to the limper, and he doesn't respect the isolation raise, and seeing how he's been playing 100% of his hands, he decides to come along as usual. Flop is interesting. It's a semi-way flop. It's drawy. There's a flush draw, there's a straight draw with the 4-5, and then we flop top pair, but our kicker kind of sucks. We're not too worried about the kicker because this player here, if he has a jack, he's probably got a weaker kicker. This player here, the fact that he's ISO raising, his range is wide, and it just doesn't mean that he has a jack. The fact that I have a jack, there's a jack on the board, reduces the likelihood of 50% that he does have a jack. So this player, this horrendous player, min donks out, which is completely fishy. What I make of this is he either has a pair of 4s or 5s, and he hit the flop and he's min betting, or he has some sort of a draw. Maybe he has a straight draw or a flush draw, or some sort of maybe even a weak jack. And then when the initial aggressor, player 5 here, the one that ISO raised him, when he just comes along, that just tells me that he's on a weak draw as well. Maybe he has overs, maybe he has something like Queen King, Ace Queen, Ace 10 or something, and he just wants to float. So given that we have top pair, we don't want to allow them to see the turn for free, because there's a lot of turn cards that we won't like. Any diamond, any 3, any 5, any 6, any 7, even a deuce. You know, a lot of those complete any draws that he may be drawing to. And then additionally, if a queen, a king, or an ace comes, it hits his range as well, so he may be floating with overs. So with that said, I think we need to raise it up here, and I believe I do. And I raise it to 82 cents. On the pot, after his initial min bet and his call, it was just over $1. Now it's $1.25. I think this raise is fine. We're getting value from it. We don't want to get so much value that we get this bad player to fold, and this player as well. He is behind. You know, we don't want. We're fine with one of them folding, but I would prefer that one of them comes along, so we can get additional value on the turn. And so, as expected, player 4 calls. Potentially, I'm assuming a majority of the time he's on a draw, either a straight draw, flush draw, or maybe he has a pair of fives or a weak pair of jacks. He doesn't want to fold. And then player 5 down here, the initial raiser, he comes along as well. I think a majority of the time he's just floating. Maybe he has pocket sixes through pocket tens as well, and he doesn't like the jack and he's floating, or he could have overs. So the 4 hits the turn. I'm not super happy about the 4 because I think it hits player 4's range with him donking out on the flop, but I think it hits a small percentage of his range. I think a majority of the time he either has a 5 or jack, or he has some sort of a draw, more so than a 4. So I'm not too worried about the 4, but I'm also not happy because if I lead out here and he decides to check raise me, then we're assuming he does have a 4, and he probably doesn't have any bluffs in his range on this board here, and we'll probably just have to give up our jacks. But he checks, which is great for us. This tells me that whatever he had, he missed out. So I'm just going back to my initial read and putting him on a flush draw or a straight draw. And then when player 5 checks as well, again, I'm going back to my initial read that maybe he has small pocket pairs, pocket sixes through pocket tens, or he was just floating with overs. And so we can assume that we are ahead here a majority of the time. And so with that said, we need to value bet, and I threw out a value bet $2 into a 351, so roughly, just under 2/3 pot, which I think is fine. If they call, we can easily get stacks in on the river with our top pair, and given that it's not a scare card, and also we're pricing them out in terms of not giving them a great price to call on the turn as well. And they both fold, and we take it down. So I think this is a fairly standard spot. I think the most interesting was the flop itself. I think some players that are newer players might be hesitant to raise it up with a jack-10 off, seeing how our kicker isn't that great. But seeing how it played out pre-flop, and then on the flop when he donk bet out for a min bet, I think we're good about, I don't know percentage-wise, but I think we're good a majority of the time, especially when player 5 on the flop, he calls a 10-cent bet instead of raising it up himself. He obviously doesn't like the jack, or he just missed out completely on the flop and had something like ace high, king high, queen high, or a medium pocket pair that didn't like the jack. Alright, let's go ahead and load up another hand. Okay, so this hand I have 4-5 suited on the button, and if it folds around to me, I'm going to open this up as a standard steal. As you improve your game, I think you can open up your ceiling range significantly, especially if there's bad players in the blinds, which there are. We have a 36-9 and we have a 90-50. So against bad players, we definitely want to be stealing wider because we'll have positional advantage, and we have skill advantage as well. Card advantage doesn't matter as much because we don't have to play our cards. We can play our range, and we can play the board texture instead. And being in position, we get to dictate how the hand flows. So it does fold around to me, and I do a button steal, standard open, small blind calls, small blind folds, big blind calls, and we get a great flop here. So we flop bottom 2 pair. Yes, this is a really wet board. Seeing how he's a 90-50, he's playing roughly almost 100% of his range. This hits a huge portion of his calling range. Yes, he could have flopped the straight, but there's so many more combos of draws than him actually hitting the straight. Yes, I have blockers to the 5 and the 4, so it reduces those by half. But I don't have a blocker to the 6. I don't have any blockers to hearts as well. So he could have flush draws here. He could have straight draws. He could have the straight. He could have either the 2-3 or the 7-8. But he could also have something like an 8-9 that gives him a gut shot straight draw, or maybe an ace deuce that gives him a gut shot as well. So there's lots of draws in addition to made hands. He checks, and when he checks, we're obviously heads up and with 2 pair, even on such a wet board. Don't be afraid to bet here. I think some beginning players may think, well, I do have 2 pairs, but this is such a scary board that I don't want to bet. Definitely bet, especially heads up when it's you against the big blind and he's playing such a wide range. You don't want to get gun shy here. We need to be going for value, and then if he does raise us, we can just evaluate it based upon what type of range we think he's raising with and the pot odds, implied odds that we're getting. So I bet 37 into 55, roughly 3/4 pot, and he does 3-bet me, so he does check raise me, not 3-bet me, and he makes it a standard, roughly just under 3x. I think here that he could be on a draw. Yes, he could have made the straight, but he could have a flush draw, straight draw. He could have a combo draw as well with top pair and an up-down draw or gutted draw. So I think that there are tons of draws in his range in addition to his actual made hand that there's no way we're folding here with our bottom 2 pair. I don't think it's strong enough to raise, because if we do raise, I don't think he's getting it in with worse. But also, I think our hand is too strong to fold. And I'm going to go ahead and pause the video. I'm going to open up Equilab to kind of give an idea of what type of range I think he could be raising with. Okay, so I just quickly went ahead and assigned him at a range. Again, I stated that it could be any sort of a draw, and you notice here I am including any sort of a combo draw where either potentially he has a pair with a straight draw, as well as all of his made hand sets as well as usual. And as you notice here, if you look at this, there's tons of draws here where he could have a pair and a draw, or he could have an up down or double gutter here. So there's tons of hands in the 90-50s range that hit where we're still ahead, but he has tons of equity to suck out on us, compared to, and additionally, the hands that are made as straight as well. The ones that make the straight are just a small portion. Like if we do 3-2, we remove that. You'll notice this is a small portion of his range for the made straight, and the 7-8 as well. Let me take the 7-8s out of there, and a set of 6s beat us as well. The last combos of the set of 4 and sets of 5. So if you look at this huge wide range of hands, there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different hands that beat us. In terms of the 3-2, 16 combos of that. In terms of 7-8, suit and offsuit, total of 16 combos. 3 combos of sets of 6s, and then 1 combo of each of those. So, and then if we look at the combos of these, there's 16 combos of all of these in terms of, and then also for the pairs, there's 6 combos of those as well. So if we look at it, it's just a drastically small percentage of hands that beat us at this point versus the ones that are still drawing. And then if we take this, we put in Equilab. So if I give him this super wide range of all these drawing hands in addition to his made hands, I put my specific hands here, I put the flop in here. It shows this as a slight favorite. We have roughly 56% equity. He has 43.5% equity in the pot. So we are roughly a 6.5% favorite over him here against his huge range. So with that said, because we are a favorite, we're definitely not folding against such a wide range. We definitely have to call. And yes, I could re-raise him again and potentially get called by some really good draws, but I think calling is fine as well. And also, if I do call and a blank comes off on the turn, if he continues firing away, we do get value from his semi-bluffs. So I call, and I think being in position, it's much easier to call. Out of position, it's much more difficult to call. Just like what I said pre-flop, is that when we're in position, we get to dictate the flow of the hand. When you're out of position, you really don't get to dictate the flow of the hand. It's really, being out of position is really difficult to get value when you have a good hand, and it's really hard to play when you have a draw, especially against an aggressive player. And then we just have a pure blank. This jack of clubs changes nothing. So if we think that we were ahead on the flop, we're still ahead on the turn. And we'll just validate this by putting this turn card in here. If we put the jack of clubs in here, we evaluate the equity. You'll notice that actually my equity increases. sorry, my equity goes up from the 56% to 62% because he still has tons of draws in his hands and he only has one more card to see versus two, and the odds of him hitting them decrease. So his equity is now only 37.99% versus me being 62%. So this changes absolutely nothing. And when he bets here, we're obviously calling again. We're never folding here. Don't be afraid of a pot size bet. Don't be afraid of an oversized bet. Don't look at the jack as a scare card because it really changes nothing in terms of his pre-flop and his flop raising range. So he does put out a bet of 170 into a pot of 260. And so, you know, that does look like a value bet. But we have two pair on this board. We're obviously calling, and I think our hand is still too weak to raise. I think we're only going to, if we raise, we're only going to get called by made hand, especially on the turn. We're probably only going to get called by a straight or a set. So I think calling's fine. It keeps the weaker hands in his range in here and doesn't really strengthen it. And we don't risk getting re-raised and having to make a difficult decision on the turn, being in position. So I think calling here is fine. And then on the river, this is our money card. So we river a boat, and at this point we're just looking to figure out how do we get the money in on the river. And if you look at stack sizes, I have just over a pot size bet here. So if he shuts down, we're obviously going to be betting here, and I think the only move here is really just a jam, but we're actually hoping that he bets, and if he does bet, we're raising. And he does shove all in. When he shoves all in, we're not worried here. We're not worried here about him having a boat, because if you really think about it, in terms of the combinations of full houses, there's one combo for pocket fives that makes fives full. There's one combo of there's no combos of fours since we have one of the fours, and there's three combos of sixes. So in terms of combinations of hands, there's a total of four combinations. One combo of pocket fives that make fives full that beat us, one combo or three combos of sixes full that beat us as well. And then in terms of straights for 3-2 and 7-8, there's a total of 16 plus 16 for 32 combos. So there's a lot more combos of made straights than there are boats, and so we're never afraid here. Don't be worried when he jams that, oh great, he has pocket fives or he has pocket sixes. If he does, you're just going to lose it anyways. So we make the call. I think that's an easy call here. And then if we look at his hand, he was on a pure bluff on the river, so he actually had a weaker range than we thought he did. And if we look back at his stats, his aggression factor is 9.0. Yeah, it's only a small sample size of 10 hands, but he's just shown to be super aggressive, loving to bet and not liking to call and check instead. So I do understand the check raise on the flop because he does have a draw to the straight. Yes, a 3 makes it straight, but in terms of his equity, with the queen deuce off, he only has 4 outs. And in my opinion, I think this is a good spot to bluff, but when you get called and then you bet again on the turn and you get called, and then a 4 hits the river and you've been called to multiple streets, I think it's probably time to shut down on your bluff because it's probably not going to work. Obviously, somebody's either got straight here or they got a set or they have 2 pairs and they just boated up. So with that said, I don't mind him bluffing with check raise on the flop and on the turn, but when it comes to the river, if you're in this situation, it's probably just a good time just to shut down and fold rather than what he did. He risked another 77.5 big blinds, try to push me off my hand, and I had a monster hand, and obviously never going to be folding there. And we'll take a look at it. If we take his range out and we put his actual hands in on the flop, we put his queen of hearts and his deuce of clubs, and we evaluate his equity. Oops, sorry about that. He's actually a huge dog here, so he doesn't know my range here, of course. I could have a really wide range, but I don't mind him making that raise there with the gut shot. So he has lots of cards that he can barrel on the turn. A heart comes, he can barrel the heart. A 7 comes, he can barrel that as well because it puts a 4 straight. So I don't mind that at all, but when it comes down the river, I think that if you're in this position, probably just want to shut down. Alright, so we'll go ahead and we'll do one more hand history and we'll call it a video. This is a really interesting hand that looks like it's a straightforward hand, but upon further analysis it's actually not as straightforward as I initially thought. So we are playing 6 ways. Under the gun folds, middle position, limps in, he's an 80-20, and so he's just a loose passive limping station. I make a standard ISO raise with king queen off in the cutoff, and I get called by a relatively unknown player. He's a 67-0 over 3 hands, so he hasn't raised a single hand. He's just called, and he's been in a total of 2 out of the 3 hands, I believe. And then, of course, a 78-17 and small blind decides to come along. Big blind folds, and the initial limper comes along as well, so we end up playing 4 ways. I flop top pair. I think this is a relatively dry board. Yes, there is a straight draw and there's a flush draw. So, you know, an ace deuce, ace 3, ace 4, ace 5 type of hand. It's going to want to continue. A 4-5, a 5-6. And any king X and any heart draw is going to want to continue. So definitely wide calling ranges on the flop. If it gets checked around to me, this is just a standard c-bet, and because it is semi-wet with lots of draws where you can get called by worse, I think that this is an easy c-bet here for probably on the larger side, roughly, you know, 3/4 pot. It does get checked around to me, and I put 120 into 170, so I think that's a fine bet. And that's roughly 70% of the pot. Player 3 on the button calls. Again, I think he can call me with a really wide range. He's a 67-0 over 3 hands. I really can't make much of this. Disregard the winnings. Down here, I actually lost this hand. It didn't go to showdown, so we disregard how much somebody's up or how much somebody's down. But when he is calling here, yeah, he could have a king. If he does have a king, I'm excited because I beat him a majority of the time. I can't imagine him having ace king and just calling. He's probably got king jack all the way down through. Who knows, you know, how low his king is. He could have a set as well, a set of deuces, a set of threes. Could have a straight draw, could have a flush draw as well. Small blind folds and middle position folds, so we're heads up. On the turn we get a 6. This is an interesting card because if he did have the straight draw, if he did have the 4-5, it completes it. If he has spades with his king here, or spades, maybe he called me with a pair of 3s, he picked up a spade draw as well. Maybe he even has something like a king 5 or a king 4, and he picks up a straight draw to go along with that as well. So yes, it does complete the 4-5 for the straight, but that's just a very small portion of his range. So I think we just have to continue value betting here, and I think again we need to make it on the larger side. So I bet 250 into 410, which is, you know, not bad. It's a bit on the smaller side. I would preferentially like to be around 3/4 pot. This is roughly 2/3 pot, but in terms of the monetary value, it's really not that much in terms of MicroStakes. And then he jams. So he jams, and I make the fold, but after looking at this hand, I did some analysis on the hand after the fact, and it's really not as straightforward as I would have thought. On such a dry board here on the turn, yes, there's a lot of draws, but there's not tons of made hands. In the moment, having, you know, minimal amount of time to make the decision, I'm assuming he's never jamming with a hand that I beat. His value range is so far ahead of a king queen top pair that he's either got a set of deuces, a set of threes, a set of sixes, or he had the 4-5 and he hit the straight, or maybe he has 2 pairs, king deuce, king 3, or king 6. And so with that said, it looks like it's straightforward fold, but looking at the draws here, I think that he could jam with a wide variety of draws. And let me go ahead and pause the video and kind of show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so I'm on our website, on our forum, and I zoomed in as much as I could to keep this on here without having it go off the screen. I think if I go any bigger, it's going to go off the screen. So I did an EV calculation, and for those of you that are unaware of EV is, it's expected value, and it's your expected value either as a profit or a loss on any given hand in a specific situation over the long run. And the calculation is your percentage equity in the pot times the total pot size, so the amount you stand to win, minus villain's equity minus the cost to call. And so if you think about it on this board, and let me go ahead and pull this back up, there's a lot of draws here. He could have a heart draw, he could have a spade draw, he could have a combo draw where he has a pair and a straight draw. He could have a straight draw. He could have a king with the spade flush draw as well, or he could have king deuce, king three, king six as well. So, you know, and he could also just have the ace high draws on the heart draw or the spade draw as well that he floated me. So there's tons and tons of outs here. And if I go back to the website, and I kind of talked about this in here, I think his turn re-raise jam is sets, the straight, any king X suited combos of hearts or spades for top pair, plus the flush draw, pocket aces, any ace X suited combo of spades for the flush or the straight draw, and also in addition to that, any two pair combos, king six, king deuce, king three. And so what I did is I put that into Equilab. And in terms of the equity, it listed him as having roughly 40% equity, so he was a bit of a favorite, and me having 46% equity. Now, in terms of, let me go ahead and try to minimize this so you can see. We'll put it up here at the top. So in terms of the decision here, when he raises and puts me all in, I would have to risk another $565 on top of my $250 to win a pot that's $14.75. So getting back to our standard EV calculation here, if I put my equity in against his wide range, it comes up as roughly 46%. So 46% of the time I'm going to win $14.75. 54% of the time I'm going to lose this additional, on top of this additional $5.62. And if we do this calculation here, and actually I have less than that, so I'm going to lose less. I didn't realize that here. If I do, I don't have 565 behind my 250, so it's actually less than that. It is actually, sorry, I do have more than 565. So I stand to win on the average over the long run. Doesn't mean the specific hand, but over the long run I stand to win a positive EV play of $3.73, which would be roughly 37 big blinds against such a huge range. And that's including you know, his two pair combos, his flush draws, his king combos where he has kings with some sort of a draw, either be a gut shot straight draw or it be the flush draw as well. And so taking that consideration, it says yes, I am a favorite. Now if I just reduce this even further, so if I reduce his hand range even further, where I reduced all the ace X out of his range, and let me go ahead and pause this and open up Equilab to show you what range I'm giving him, and then I'll be back in one sec. So Equilab isn't behaving well. It's kind of tweaking out at me, so I'm not sure what's going on with that. But I do have the EV calculation up here. So if I give him this huge range here, where we're just taking his ace high flush draws out of here, and we're just leaving the kings in for any sort of a king type of flush draw, as well as, you know, his main hands where he has two pair or he has kings, and he's a huge favorite when we just remove those. He's a 65% favorite. I'm only 35% favorite. But in terms of the pot odds I'm getting, and we do the EV calculation here, if you look at it, it's roughly, I would say, close to break even on EV, because this is not including the rake. Including the rake, I think it's break even. So if he's only shoving with lots of value hands that beat us, in value hands that we may beat, where he has draws to flushes or straights. I think it's closer. So, you know, just looking at this at the table, this looks like it's an easy fold, but when you do analysis after the fact and you kind of estimate his range, what he could be jamming with, because he's not always jamming with the king, specifically because we have a king, we block a lot of kings and reduce those combos, but he's, you know, yes, he's jamming with kings, he's jamming with sets as well, he's jamming with the straight, but he's also probably jamming with draws as well, potentially good draws. So, you know, this is where doing off-the-table analysis kind of brings insight into hands that on the table kind of looks like it's an easy fold, but then you look at, you know, your analysis in terms of their range, your equity, the odds that you're getting. Many times it's closer to a call than it is a fold. Yes, we'll lose a lot, but potentially if he's as wide as he is, 67-0, we can't really take much from that, but assuming that, you know, he hasn't raised anything pre-flop, he's just called so far, we can look at him as a fish. He may overvalue certain draws and not understand equity, and so potentially we could be ahead of some of his jamming bluff range as a semi-bluff. So hope that kind of provides insight into off-the-table hand analysis, and hopefully I provided some semi-interesting spots. I know some of them were pretty standard, but for the most part I think there were certain aspects to each hand where we have to take the players' tendencies into considerations, their ranges as well, and you know, our equity and our odds. So hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. Take care. We'll see you at the next video.